I was so wrapped up in my own world of journalism and films that I forgot that there was a story right underneath my face. Literally. My father never really talked about his experiences during the war, and he refused to even talk about how he won the Victoria Cross.
Ms. Ashali Verma is a columnist for the Times of India, No Free Lunch. She has also authored 2 books, The Victoria Cross, A Love Story, a biography on her late father, Lieutenant General P.S. Bhagat, PVSM, VC, and the Modi Magic. The Indian Army has also dedicated a chair of excellence in his memory at the US side. The USA and the Bombay Sappers also organized the annual Lieutenant General P.S. Bhagat Memorial Lecture.
However, there are certain trade practices that can be very detrimental to the world, and that I think China right now is facing that.
Ms. Verma started her career with the International Commentary Service Inc. at the New York as executive producer for a series of documentaries. She produced a 1-hour documentary, The Great Global Bazaar, filmed in Malaysia, Brazil, Singapore, and Morocco, and of snakes and software, India at the crossroads of change, and 32 other documentaries from 30 countries.
In the case of Iran, it has proxies like the Hezbollah, the Hamas, the Houthis. And the Houthis are directly affecting trade because they are based on the Red Sea.
She then went on to become editor Choices Magazine UNDP New York from 1998 to 2001. Ms. Ashali Verma was awarded the Global Award for Media Excellence for Best Population Environment Reporting Effort in 1997 by the Population Institute, Washington. Welcome to the Cyber Peace podcast, Ms. Verma. So, how are you doing today?
I'm really excited to be invited by you, and I hope this is a good session.
Thank you so much. So, today our discussion will focus on global trade practices, economy, geopolitical tensions, sustainable economic growth, economic consequences of high tariffs, geopolitical tensions, India and Pakistan ties, soft power strategies of India and China, influence of the US in international relations and national interests. So, we invite you to join us for this insightful conversation that promises to enhance your understanding of these pressing issues. So, starting with the first question, ma'am, with your extensive global experience in the field of journalism, can you shed some light on your career spanning several decades?
It started in the 1990s, early 1991. And I was very privileged because I was actually sent to many countries in the world, and that itself was a extremely good educational experience. You meet people from all walks of life. And I was in filming those days. I was making documentaries, so it was extremely satisfying to go to 30 countries. I went to China 5 times. I've been to many countries. I was living in America for 14 years and Thailand for 4. So there's a wide experience you get from reporting from so many different countries. And most of my work in America was outside America. So that was another experience which was very, very good for me. And I realized that the world is really what we call it. If you just leap across boundaries and you meet with people, then all they want is the same thing. They want a good job, they want peace, they want an education, they want to do better than their parents. So these are the things, and then they also need to have a sustainable future because you can't have anything without water and pollution, good water, no pollution. So even while we advance, we have to keep in mind all this.
All right. So, as the daughter of the esteemed Lieutenant General Prem Singh Bhagat, a World War II hero, and the first Indian officer awarded the Victoria Cross for gallantry, could you share some insights about your published book, The Victoria Cross?
Well, I actually didn't want to write a book on my father, but since I was a journalist and I had written so much, when my mother was dying of cancer, I came to look after her, and I found that a lot of the army was still around her and they were protecting her, even though my father at that time had been gone for 33 years. So I was quite amazed. And when I saw the kind of warmth and love he still had, I said, this is a story waiting to be told. And due to a lot of, I was so wrapped up in my own world of journalism and films that I forgot that there was a story right underneath my face, literally. And my mother, before she died, told me a lot of things, and I found many letters from Africa while my father was fighting, sent to my mother, which she had saved. So I had to go through a lot of archival footage and archival notes, which were in archives and in the Nehru Memorial Library. And this was because my father never really talked about his experiences during the war, and he refused to even talk about how he won the Victoria Cross. So I was mostly reliant on other people's and other books that had been written on him.
Okay. So, moving to the major aspects, of the podcast today. So, and beginning with the global trade. So, in what ways do you think the global agreements influence economic relationships between countries? And also, could you share some examples of both successful and detrimental agreements?
Well, trade can be both very, very successful because it helps countries that don't have certain, resources to get them, and also helps to bring them more advanced, bring them up. However, there are certain trade practices that can be very detrimental to the world, and that I think China right now is facing that because it had developed a kind of industrial scale that where that even the WTO and many countries thought that they were dumping goods. And dumping means you are making stuff, whether it's steel or any product, and you're selling it below even your own price because you're subsidizing that industry such a lot. And China was doing this in everything. Right now, China is doing it in EV, in their EV markets, and they are facing a lot of blowback from countries which are trying to develop their own EVs, and they are also dumping EVs into the market.
Yes. Okay, so moving to the geopolitical tensions that the world is facing at present. So, how do these geopolitical tensions and conflicts affect the global trade routes and the flow of goods? And also, what strategies can countries employ to mitigate these disruptions?
Well, the first thing, well, coming back to the last part of your question, is you need to have some form of conflict resolution. I mean, we've had wars going on with Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Gaza. It started off, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, and it's still not resolved. But the fact is that there are countries which are actually making it worse. Like, for instance, in the case of Iran, it has proxies like the Hezbollah, the Hamas, the Houthis. And the Houthis are directly affecting trade because they are based on the Red Sea. And for the last over a year and a half, they have been attacking large scale shipping, and which affects trade directly because the ships now have to get higher insurance if they're going through the Red Sea, or they have to go through the Cape of Good Hope. So, on a whole, and there are people who are encouraging the, giving arms to Iran to, which is resupplying them to their proxies. So it seems to be like a very difficult and long more.
So, today, you see that there's been a lot of debate on the tariffs, you know, like across the world. So, what are the potential long term economic consequences of high tariffs imposed on China by various countries?
Well, it's a reaction against Chinese trade practices. China itself uh, could, subsidized everything from its active pharmaceutical ingredients, which goes into every medicine in the world. And now they have almost 60-70% of the market. So this is what China does. It overproduces, it has subsidizes industries, and it just dumps goods all over the world. So these are not very good trade practices. In fact, they are bad and there will be a blowback. So high tariffs means, yes, there will be pain for people, but there will be the different supply chains will come up. China became the factory of the world, and so everybody depended on China, and they put too much of their money and their risk on China. So now the world is realizing it. It will take time, but I think China will suffer in the long run.
So, post Operation Sindoor, there's been a lot of talk about, the relationship or the diplomacy between India and Pakistan. So, what is your vision for a future relationship between India and Pakistan? And what are the steps that we can take today to move towards this?
Actually, Pakistan has more steps to take than we have. We had at one stage they were we had given the most favored trade nation to them,
Yes.
and we had done a lot. But every time we moved one step forward, they stabbed us in the back. So I have a feeling that after Operation Sindhu, there are a lot of red lines for us concerning Pakistan. It cannot be business as usual. Until the army is powerful in Pakistan, it will continue to carry on attacking India by 1,000 cuts. And this, I mean, we get a break from it for few months, few years, but they keep sending what they call non-state actors, but they're actually state actors. They're completely, I mean, all the terrorist groups in America, in Pakistan, are very much part of the state. And they are funded by the state, they're nurtured by the state, they're protected by the state. As a matter of fact, after Operation Sindoor, when we attacked the Jaish-e-Mohammed headquarters, we found that the army, the politicians, everybody was at the funeral of the relatives of the Jaish-e-Mohammed. So it just shows that that terror and Pakistan are literally uh, together. And till this is recognized by the whole world and Pakistan is punished, I'm afraid it will continue. And there is nothing we can do apart from saving ourselves, making ourselves more secure, and pointing out to the world what Pakistan is doing. And it's doing it without major consequences. After all, if you remember, Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan. What did Pakistan suffer for it? Very little. Mm. So, it's on Pakistan's shoulders to become more, I would say, effective in controlling their uh, terror outfits, which I don't think they're going to do.
So, in your opinion, how do you see this in the next 5 years? How do you see this situation in the next?
As I said, it depends on Pakistan. We are never the aggressors. They're the aggressors. So, I mean, if they carry on like this, I mean, we are going to keep hitting them back. It's not going to help anybody.
Okay, so moving on to China. So, how do India's democratic values compare with China's authoritarian governance in shaping their respective approaches to soft power?
Actually, India has always been very much ahead of soft power than China. For instance, I had this story to tell you about when I visited China many times. I worked there for a month during during a UN summit. So I know China pretty well. And I felt that the people themselves are quite nice and hardworking. However, the government is extremely authoritarian. And one of the way our soft power works is that in the past, a lot of our Bollywood movies would go to China. And once I was stuck in an airport in Beijing, just arrived from America, and it was 3 in the morning, and car which was supposed to come and pick me up didn't. So I had to take a taxi. And the guy knew no English. He was Chinese, but he sort of thought and recognized me and said Hindi. So I said yes. So he started singing Mera Juta Hai Japani, and he sang many Hindi songs throughout the trip from the airport to the hotel. So I could see that uh, there was a lot of influence. I mean, movies like The Three Idiots made it big in China and still very, very popular.
And even today, it's doing well.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that we are ahead of in soft power, and we are recognized as a democracy. And more after COVID, and even just before, people were realizing that China is not only a very authoritarian state, but it's hegemonic. It is fighting with almost all 14 of its neighbors. So, I mean, it's declared the South China Sea as its own backyard. So this,
Also, the BRI.
yeah, and the BRI actually was a kind of soft power thing with China to get to know other countries, but actually they wanted to take over vital spots of that country. So the Belt and Road Initiative initially went to 100 countries or more. And recently, more and more countries are realizing it's a death trap. They are just like Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. I mean, they had a regime change over it.
The debt trap, like in terms of checkbook diplomacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they buy you,
Yes, they buy.
and they buy you by buying your top leaders. And then they slowly get into making ports everywhere so that they have an advantage in the country. And people have realized it. Unfortunately, it took a long time. But one thing that is come out of it is the trillion or so dollars that China spent on this. They're not getting the returns.
It could be,
They're,
Gwadar Port or Hambantota.
yeah, they're not getting any returns.
Yes.
I mean, there are no ships going there. And these are things that they did for perhaps for their own security. But no country can invest such large amounts and get nothing back. So China is itself heavily in debt.
Is there anything you want to elaborate on, like, say, on the, health diplomacy through BRI and, various other aspects, what China is trying to be?
Health, I wouldn't say is a priority of China. They want money. They're not really concerned about people's health. So I don't think there's diplomacy as far as health is concerned. Whenever you hear about the BRI, it's ports, it's railways, it's big, big projects which drowns the country in debt and doesn't give any returns to China. So there are no benefits, I think, to either China or the country they're in.
Do you think that India did a good job by not joining the BRI?
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I think India was way ahead of its time. And one of the reasons we didn't join the BRI also was because China is occupying some of our territory, not only in Aksai Chin, but in Nepal. In Nepal, but more because the BRI went into what was called CPEC, which is China Pakistan Economic Corridor, and that went through Gilgit-Baltistan, which is actually a part of India. It has always been a part of India. So there was no question of us joining.
Okay. So, moving to the US, what factors contribute to America's perception as a friend or a foe in international relations? And what lessons can be learned from countries that have successfully balanced national interests with international friendships?
Okay, we are doing that. I think India is doing that to a large degree. Certain European countries are doing that. Um, America itself, everybody says that America is nobody's friend, really. I mean, they are your partners when they need you. And they're looking for markets all over the world. So they're in a very advanced country, and they need, uh, they need to export, and they also need to import from from poorer countries because their labor laws and their labor rates are very high. So it's a win-win situation if you go into the right, if there's a level playing field. And if America recognizes that, these countries need a little bit of help, so we won't have this trade barrier here. And, it works for both. It's a question of a trade deal and a very, uh, a level playing field, where a country should be recognized for what it's doing, and America should also be, you know, fairly open to it.
So, what strategies could ensure mutual benefits for both India and the US without compromising their respective interests?
There are a lot of strategies. We've got a lot of foreign direct investment from China, from America. We appreciate that they 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 leap forward in technology, and our people, Indians, are very good at actually taking that technology and being like not only the back office of the world, but even now today, Indian companies, even based in India, are working with American companies to things like research, RD, a lot of different AI. So we are giving a lot of good benefits to America. And this cannot be underrated in any way. So we are, America can help us and we can help them, and they know it. So hopefully we come to a good trade deal.
All right, ma'am. So, finally, we come to the end of the podcast. So, before we conclude the podcast, what message would you like to convey to cyber peace?
Well, I think you're doing a good job, and I hope you continue to do it. And I hope you get many more viewers, because some of the topics we have discussed, you won't find such an open discussion on it on a regular TV. They take one topic and they discuss it. So we've gone through a whole lot of topics, and we've seen, been able to at least clarify some issues that India needs to do, and how China reacts, how America reacts, and the European Union, and things like that.
You want to elaborate more on the recent cyber attacks and, like what, the government of India is doing right.
Well, right now there was a big throw about 5 days ago. DRDO and IIT Delhi, they demonstrated quantum entanglement-based free space quantum secure communication, which means this is a huge giant leap. I mean, you can't hack quantum secure communication. And they have been able to show it over a period of a mile, a distance of a mile. So if they can, and I'm sure they're going to leap forward And it will become something which will not only give us cybersecurity, but we can actually help other countries get it. And the more cybersecurity you have, and the less hacking that very rogue nations do to you, uh, the more peace there will be in the world. I mean, you don't want your grids attacked or your telephone exchange attacked by some hacker.
Yes.
So, with quantum security, with this quantum communication, secure communication, which is more than a kilometer, hopefully it will go all over India. And why shouldn't it? If we've done it for 1 kilometer, we are used to doing things really fast.
So, before we end the podcast, do you have any last minute comments to make, ma'am?
I think it's been really a nice privilege for me to meet you and to be here with for the podcast. And I hope it's helpful to people who are listening and who are going to see it. Thank
Right.
you.
So, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast now. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into our show. We look forward to another exciting episode next week. Until then, this is Dr. Preeti signing off.